that is essentially where we are, and I'm happy to take questions if you've got them.
Yeah. I'm from Indiana, so this is kind of an Indiana-based question, but I heard you say several times that Michigan's energy policy needs to be made by Michiganders and not by the EPA and the federal government. In Indiana this session, there's been legislation introduced to nullify the EPA regulations for Indiana. Is there a move afoot to do that in Michigan?
So I'm a lawyer, so forgive me for this because it's going to be a lawyer-type answer. Nullification laws are really constitutionally difficult to do for precisely the reason that in most cases the federal laws are officially supersede state control. So you can say essentially, hey, we're not doing that, but what would happen in the EPA rules, for instance, is when states don't enforce, that means that the EPA comes in and enforces it for you. So before I worked here in Michigan, I was actually on the staff of Governor Phil Batt of Idaho. And what happened there was we had 8, 6, I've forgotten the number, but a handful of places that violated their air permit every single year. And they had basically decided that the cost of that, you know, the penalties, was lower than what it would take for them to do it. So kind of every year they made the decision to do it, even though kind of if they could have consolidated it for 2 years running, they would have just built the thing and we would have had better air quality for less money, right? So what the Idaho governor decided to do was basically for a year be like, if that money gets spent somewhere else, I will forget to fund it. And the next year, every single one of those came out of non-compliance into compliance. And the Clinton administration came in and yanked our permitting authority that same year, and it took us like a year to get it back because they said we hadn't followed the law. So, you know, in terms of just could the state legislature just say to the EPA, well, we won't do it. My personal fear would be that if we were to say that the federal government would see that as an invitation to do it for us. And based on my experience in the UP, I would rather think about how we best cope with whatever is sent to us and make sure the decision gets made here than sort of invite other people to make our decisions for us. Yeah.
MISO endorses a regional approach in the preliminary remarks to the EPA on the Clean Power Plan, and they say how much cheaper it would be if MISO complied as a region instead of state by state. Have you talked to MISO much, solicited their help, and why or why not?
So MISO was part of the problem in the Upper Peninsula because all MISO can do is tell you that you've got to pay to run a plant, and they pick the amount, and then you can go fight about it at FERC, which has not really worked out for Michigan. And then they can order you to build transmission and pay for it, even if building generation would be cheaper. So while MISO has been, their staff has actually been helpful in getting us the information we then need to try to counter what their own rules have brought forth. Just like I don't want Washington making my decisions, I don't necessarily want to cede my decision making to MISO. The other issue we have is it was MISO that's given us the gigawatt number. I believe, I mean, their engineering is pretty solid, so I believe them. But, you know, the idea that, okay, we'll just comply as a region still begs the question, but if Michigan needs baseload in Michigan, which is what they were telling us, all the MISO in the world telling us, hey, you need some, like, it wasn't getting it built, it wasn't getting it done, it isn't averting the problem. So again, while I don't mind working with MISO, I don't trust, I wouldn't put our decision making in their hands.
Can I ask a follow-up, make a follow-up comment?
If you're polite.
Like so far.
MISO has some very bright engineers.
They do.
They're using the EGEAS modeling system that was developed by Everett. That's not good. It has you build CT over combined cycle every single time, even if you're short on base load. So you should talk to Geeka or somebody that you know there that's deeply involved with that. And because if their business as usual model is messed up, they can't very well come up with the right answers for compliance scenarios.
Yeah, well, MISO, their expertise is the grid. It is not baseload. It is not plants at all. And part of the thing that we've run into with the Upper Peninsula is when someone comes to them and says, hey, this is what it costs to run a plant, This is something the state public service commissions have been looking at for 100 years, and it's something that they've been looking at for 10 minutes.
Well, they're
And they
relying on
just-
EPRI for that information about what it costs to run a plant, and EPRI's data is messed up.
Well, yeah, so MISO they're never gonna tell you what the rate base is, because that's not their design. What they're really designed to do is tell you what the flow is, the power flow is, and so what their models are really good at is telling you how many electrons you need at one spot. Telling you where the electrons come from is not their strong suit, but also most of the stuff that they really know about how much it costs is all proprietary, because exactly what particular plants bid in at is super proprietary, and everyone would like strangle them if they actually revealed it. So the folks at MISO who actually know what it costs to do generation can't really share that with everybody also. So yes, they're using this model result. I know they're not using it for the auctions, which is good. But I also know that, you know, if you're running around asking people what should I build, you know, which baseload generation, you know, you don't go to a transmission person to tell you what you ought to do on the generation side, and MISO is the transmission people. So again, I'm not saying we couldn't work with other states if that's the cheapest alternative. It's something we're certainly open to, but I'm just saying, you know, what MISO is telling us is you have a Michigan problem, and I'd rather solve it here in Michigan. But not to say that if it wasn't cheaper, we'd be willing to work with other states.
So the thumb loop didn't help, huh?
The thumb loop did help somewhat, but in terms of baseload generation, it was not built to replace plants. Once you start building to replace plants, you're talking about a different kind of build.
You said that,
I'm sorry,
half
so
a billion-
other people have questions
sorry.
too? So I'm gonna, okay,
Yeah.
in the red shirt and then in the back.
How much did you say they'd be short by? How much power?
So originally MISO said 3 gigawatts, but based on some power that has been purchased and therefore has kind of switched, it's where it is in the column, so to speak, I think that we're now looking at a 1 gigawatt about.
Has anybody looked at what that does to the rest of the gas supply throughout the state, if they go to gas? Is there enough gas to do that?
Oh, in terms of to build enough
Yeah.
generation to,
Yep.
yeah, so it depends on where it is, obviously, but in terms of just pure pipelines, there are places you could put that in Michigan and not have to vastly
There's
expand.
plenty of gas supply that wouldn't cause homeowners and stuff like that, their bills to go up because it's being used for electricity.
So those are two different, so in terms of do we need more pipelines, it's a different question of just if there is more demand, won't that increase cost? But keep in mind that gas prices have actually plummeted, natural gas prices have plummeted recently because of the ability to
But you have so much,
access.
my question is
gas
production of
amounts.
gas, there's enough production of gas to make up for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's enough production of gas right now that they're firing it in North Dakota instead of like sending it. The problem isn't so much, is there enough? The question is, how do you get it where it needs to get? And, you know, so depending on where you put a plant in Michigan, which is not true for many states, you would be in a place where there's enough storage and enough pipelines that you could get the gas you needed there.
That's being looked at, I guess, in March.
Oh, yeah, but that's part of the reason that we want the MDQ to be able to talk to the MPSC, because the MPSC knows, you know, what it costs to run things and where the grid could take a new plant easily, and the DEQ, you know, knows sort of what other regs could be coming that would make certain locations harder or easier, and so part of what we want to do is kind of formalize that discussion so that when people are looking at what needs to get built, if we've got a spot where you could put it that's really good on all dimensions, the folks who would know that are all in the room together to discuss it.
Then what's percentage plus it's gotta be, like if you need a 470 megawatt plant, would it be plus 15% over demand or?
I don't believe it's that kind of number, but I would need to run that by our experts.
There is
I mean,
some plus safety factor though.
yeah, but, I mean, so this is why, I'm not trying to dive, this is why it's a complicated question. If you put it in the right place where you've got a ton of storage, you could buy the gas in the
No, I'm
summer
talking
when no
about
one needs it
gigawatts
and store
generating
it.
that power.
I know, and what I'm saying is if you can store it near the plant so that you'll be able to build it over a long period of time, when you may be really increasing demand in the summer when the prices aren't actually very high because we're not all needing to heat our homes. And if you're in the right spots, you can put it in the ground and then burn it all winter.
Understand the gas, but the generator is so many gigawatts.
He's talking peak demand on the
Yes.
Oh, you mean how many plants would you need?
Yeah, how much excess plant do you need?
Reserve.
Excess.
Oh,
Reserve
okay,
margin.
so the gigawatt includes the reserve margin, so we
Yeah.
need basically enough plants to generate a gigawatt, and so like at least two. Or the equivalent savings in like energy efficiency, including residential air conditioning cycling programs, MISO counts those. So, you know, if you're just thinking about sort of how much would we need, you could need to build as many as 2 plants, but that's only if you were building purely and you weren't doing anything else to try to meet that. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I said the guy in the back, I apologize.
Yeah, as I recall, in 2008, there was a lot of talk going in about base load and capacity. I think most people remember it now for creating the renewable mandate instead. Did they do anything in 2008 at all to help capacity and base load?
So what happened is that everyone kind of got around the table in 2007 and predicted the future, which did not include like, you know, 2008 collapse of the economy. So we lost 10% of our demand at that time. So all of a sudden it looked like we were actually fine because we had a lot of excess capacity and we had this huge fall off in demand. Demand is back, not in the DTE territory, it's only back some, in consumers it's fully back. And we have a lot more plants rolling off. So the answer is, no, we didn't, except for the renewable portfolio. We did not build a lot of new plants. We did upgrade Ludington, which is the pump storage facility that we have. So we did upgrade that, and we did build a lot of renewables, but we did not build the new baseload capacity. I think the most recent plant in Michigan, which I think is the only one since 2008, is the Lansing Municipal REO combined heat and power facility, which is not too far away. But the answer is no, we didn't, but in part that's because demand collapsed overnight. That being said, part of the reason the governor wants things to be adaptable is because what you know is if you predict the future, something will be wrong. And so he'd like us to be able to have a system for making good decisions, not predetermine the outcome of those decisions.
Why doesn't MPSC and DEQ already talk to each other?
They do informally, but here's under, it goes to authority. So the MPSC, if you read through its statutes, does not have anything that says you may consider things that aren't already the law but may be coming, you may do this, you may do that. They only have, is it reasonable and prudent? Well, it's very hard to argue that something you have to do to comply with the federal law isn't reasonable and prudent, especially if you're not getting a lot of other alternatives offered at that time, because we don't really have a system that says, here are 2 options, which one do you want? And from the DEQ standpoint, their only thing, what they're supposed to do is when someone says, I can build this, they're supposed to say that does or doesn't meet the law. And if it does, they're supposed to issue the permit, and if it doesn't, they're not, and that's really what's there. The only time DEQ gets into, is this the most cost effective, is when somebody says, I won't build that. I don't have anything that I can do that meets that. Then DEQ starts to be like, well, really? Well, what about this alternative? Show me your math. But if you bring DEQ something that meets the law, they don't really have any authority to sort of dig in and say, but is that the most cost effective, or have you considered this other thing? Like, because the assumption is the company will have done that. And at the MPSC, they sort of have, I have to do this thing, this meets it. Are they really going to say it's unreasonable for you to do it? So we don't, while there is sort of informal conversation, you know, people know each other, they occasionally call each other up, there's not really a formal way to say, we'd like you all to talk, we'd like this to be publicly discussed, we'd like alternatives to go up, and we'd like you to make your decision based on alternatives. We've had a good experience with with kind of the proceeding where we say, if you want to build a new plant, you want a special certificate that makes you much more marketable in the financial markets, you gotta come and you gotta prove it's better than any alternative. In the last consumer's certificate of need process, which is what that's called, it ended up saving customers $500 million compared to the proposal. So, you know, I think that worked wonderfully. But we only ever have that for this. I'm going to build a new plant that costs this much. That's the only time we ever really dig into the alternatives. And I think we need to do it much earlier and on investments that are very different than that.
We're going to take one more question, then I'm going to ask a question. So, Bob?
A couple of quick comments and then a very important question. First of all, suggestion for Governor Snyder from Huron County. The St. Mary's vested interest sitting on boards, be it for zoning, for state guidelines on wind turbines, and the issues going forward here. Make sure, if at all possible, pick these players out that have the vested interest sitting in here making the decisions, because that's what creates a lot of problems both locally and at the state level. The most important question I have, being from Huron County, is we keep hearing this rhetoric that we cannot get too restrictive on our zoning of these wind turbines, why the state is going to step in. Is there any realm of fact there at all?
So Governor Snyder has previously stated, I think it was 2 years ago, but it certainly hasn't changed, maybe 3 years ago now, that it supports local control to zoning. You know, you can put things there. Every time a zoning process says no, it doesn't mean that there's a problem with the process. You know, sometimes it isn't the right place to put something. You know, in the same way that we don't have statewide zoning for other types of plants, I don't know that wind is where you would start. That being said, you know, I am where there is local support for it, and there are places that have shown strong local support. You know, obviously that can be a place where things get built, and we are looking to be able to increase the state's renewable portfolio. Now, do we do it through a standard? There are lots of ways you can get more renewable, but one of our issues in Michigan is that we need to have a better diversity of supply. In the same way your financial portfolio needs to have kind of a mix of stocks and bonds and things like that, we need to have better diversity. We're more than half coal.
Well,
And
diversity would mean, in my mind, would mean you don't put it all, if you're talking just strictly wind generation, you wouldn't put it all in Huron County. You should spread it around the state.
well, you know, I'm not, what I'm trying to say is it should go, you know, where it makes sense, there's support. You know, in the same way that we currently don't have statewide zoning for all kinds of other sorts of energy plants or factories or things like that. I don't know that, you know, why you would do that for wind itself. But at the same time, you know, I just want to be honest with this group. We do think that Michigan's portfolio at this point is too heavily tilted toward coal in particular, and it is going, for the future, we've got to think about how we diversify that so that if there is, whatever the possible future is, you can roll with it more if you're not dependent on any one source for half your power, right? Because if the next thing is which means you also don't want to get over more than half natural gas, because what happens if there are then regulations on natural gas? I believe for long-term rate stability and kind of the best ability to adapt, you need to have a diverse portfolio. In the same way, you know, financially, you don't put all your money in one thing. You need to have a diverse thing to be really able to roll with unexpected changes. We have not done that traditionally in Michigan, and we're feeling the effects.
Okay, I'm going to close with just a couple things. One, Valerie may not know, but she was aware of the bill. Some of you were involved in this. Jeff Irwin had dropped the Right to Farm Act bill to qualify wind as a farming activity. Of course, we rang his phone off the hook. I badgered him on Twitter. He's essentially capitulated. He told me that he will not introduce that bill anymore. He actually found some of our videos about what the people are dealing with locally compelling, and he's going to stick with solar and distributed generation. So, good news for that. We'll see what happens on Senator Walker's bills, but of course he is retired, and I don't know that those are going to move very quickly. I would say that the message from the IICC to the governor's office on renewables is, at times of a capacity crisis, we don't think that that's the best time to build devices that have almost no capacity value. You can argue whether MISO's 14% number is accurate or Potomac's 2.7% capacity value number is accurate, but nonetheless, they're low capacity value. We would also communicate to the governor that high percentage penetrations of renewable, in fact, de-diversify our portfolio. What you didn't see was Tom's presentation, and when you model MISO with his model, which he's generated using all the FERC Form 1 data from 2013 and so forth, when you model high penetrations of wind, the vast majority, you significantly increase your reliance upon gas generation. That part is very simple. So in fact, long-term, high penetrations of wind end up being, in fact, a much stronger, you're basically going to get rid of coal, and you're going to be down to gas and wind and whatever nuclear is left before it gets retired. So we don't think that really adds meaningful diversity I'm not expecting you to agree, I just tell you what we think, because I did pay for the room. I should say, we all paid for, pardon?
I said I would hope so.
Actually, we all paid for the room, I shouldn't say I. But finally, my last question would be, to the degree that we search for more renewable energy as a matter of state policy, will the state continue to support what is in PA 295, which is an in-state generation mandate, or will we follow what I think Judge Posner suggests is the right path? To the degree that we have renewables, we'd be open to them from wherever they're generated and able to be delivered here.
Yeah, well, as I've shared with you, I don't think that, and it did not surprise me that Judge Posner had such words regarding the in-state mandate. In-state mandates are constitutionally highly questionable. The one note that I would make, which we didn't talk about much today, but I would note, because I think this group should care and think about it, is that one thing that we never really saw in Michigan was energy efficiency or eliminating energy waste displacing the renewable mandate. It was possible to do it under the previous law, but all you had to do was go through a ton of extra paperwork and then not be able to get any equity credit for your steel. So, you know, people lined up for that option. But if you look at it, the most environmentally friendly thing you can do is not need the energy. And to give you just one example, there are air conditioning cycling programs run out of both utilities. What this means is that they essentially make sure that all the air conditioners don't turn on at the same time. They do them at 20-minute cycles so that your air conditioner goes on 20 minutes differently from when your neighbor's goes on. This is hugely helpful on those hot days. I mean, hugely. Because it really, we're right now planning that everyone's air conditioning goes on at the same time, and if you can actually cycle it so that people's houses still stay cool, MISO counts it as capacity. It's much, much cheaper than building a plant we need to run 10% of the year, you know, or that comes in. As this group would know, that's exactly when your wind energy is least likely to be on the grid anyway, right? And so if you, and with the smart meter roll-up that's going on, that's going to be way cheaper to install than it used to be. Because like right now, they'd have to come install like a special thing on your house to be able to do that. Once you have smart meters, it's much, much cheaper. So when I'm thinking about, you know, how do we make sure that we make the obvious plays for Michigan? There is stuff like that lowers people's bills because the utilities will charge you a much lower rate if you're on that. That mean you don't have to build a plant, which is by far the cheapest thing you could do, plant of any kind. It gets you the control you need at the time you need it, and you don't burn any fuel, and you really, to my mind, diversify, because I think we should be considering stuff like that a resource, because it's, you know, if you don't do it, you end up building a plant for it, so why in the world you don't look at that and say, why don't we do that instead of build a plant? And in Michigan, we've tended to look at energy efficiency as this like nice add-on. Well, I keep looking at it and I think it's the most environmentally friendly thing you can do. It's really helpful for reliability. It is by far the most affordable thing you can do for the grid, which is what we all pay for, and for your own energy bill, which is what each of us individually ends up paying for. And it's the most adaptable thing you can do, because no matter what the energy future holds, if you need less of it, you're in better shape than if you need more of it, right? And even more for Michigan, if what you're talking about is insulating people's houses and stuff like that, as opposed to building more pipelines to bring gas or things like that, you are using Michigan designed products, Michigan manufactured products, you're getting them installed by somebody in Michigan, and this isn't some in-state mandate, it's just like who ends up, when you look around the country, we have a lot of businesses here that do that, and it means that you're really kind of having that pure Michigan Business Connect idea, which is not we're mandating it or we're giving special credits for it, it's just, hey, we got people who are really good at it, designing it, building it, installing it, let's connect them, let's do what's right for Michigan. So I would suggest to you that when you're thinking about, okay, but how is Michigan going to meet its energy needs and how do you do the base load? One of the obvious plays for Michigan is eliminating energy waste on the residential level and on the, you know, larger plant, your grocery store, all the rest of it level. I mean, we had examples of churches that agreed to spend $800 and paid for that in their own power bills in a year. I mean, we in Michigan have used 38% more energy than the national average. 38%. That's mostly, what?
What's your gross state product compared to the rest of the country? That's what that means.
Yeah. Well,
it's energy intensity of your productivity.
No, this isn't, this is residential.
Just residential?
Oh, right.
Just residential, we use
Electricity.
38% more, no,
Utilities.
yeah, electricity plus heat.
Oh, plus
If you
heat.
look at it, we use 38% more energy, even though our houses are smaller than the national average.
So
What that says is a lot of people in Michigan are living in a house that's uncomfortably drafty, that could save an awful lot of money, and we're worried about pipelines, right? I mean, supplies, we're worried about the costs on the air conditioning in the summer that's driving up our peaks, right? And we could be using products that are designed, manufactured, and installed here without any mandates to reduce that stuff. And MISO counts, by the way, homes that are on that air conditioning cycling against our capacity needs. So it's, I mean, it's real in that sense, so I do offer that for this group's thoughts.
Just for your own education, we do that already in Plum Electric Co-op. I've been on the dual fuel system for 25 years. They regulate my heat and my electric, the hot water heat.
And that your house has still been as comfortable?
No problem.
That's great.
They can shut it off every 20 minutes for no longer than 10 minutes at a time. So
Yeah, and it saves a lot of money as you bounce around the boards, I think.
Okay, one last question, and then Valerie's got to run.
Yes, I'm with Thumb Electric Co-op, and I used the state of Michigan, you know, the help that they gave me for putting in a geothermal system. I literally saved 75% off my heating bill right away, immediately. Now, the system did cost $15,000. It's projected to pay itself off in 5 years. It paid itself off in 3 years in 1 month. Okay, now this is, through Thumb Electric, they have a program that's called dual fuel, which means you keep your existing gas furnace or LP gas or whatever you're using or whatever. So you keep your old system and you have the new one. And that's exactly what it is. They have a certain number of hours a day that they can shut you off, like 4 or 6 hours a day or whatever. But they do it like you said with the air conditioning, like, you know, it never is off for like hours or half an hour at a time. It's, you know, I've never seen in the last 13, 14 years, I have not seen my temperature fall more than 2%. But instead of paying the normal rate, I pay half of the electric rate because I have dual fuel. So it helps the grid, you know what I mean, because I'm using a better system, you know what I mean, that doesn't require as much electricity. So all the way around programs like that is, in my opinion, is something that could really help a lot from that standpoint. So Thumb Electric Co-op, if you want to find out how that goes.
And I will say to Valerie that if the governor would adopt a policy that even subsidizes and mandates geothermal systems and no more windmills, I will cancel my subscription to Capital Confidential and abandon all my free market principles if we can make that trade.
I'm not sure I want that trade.
The initial cost is a hard thing that people can't
It is,
pass
it
that
is.
initial
It
figure,
is.
you know.
In my
They
mind,
don't
anything
really.
that's not 50 stories tall and keeping people up at night is an improvement, so we got to take what we can get. Well, let's, a round of applause for Valerie.